Layla stood at the kitchen window, her fingers tracing the condensation on her coffee mug as she gazed out at the rain-soaked garden. The dreary weather mirrored her mood, a stark contrast to the vibrant summer that had just passed. At 42, she felt trapped in a life that no longer fit, like a butterfly struggling to break free from its chrysalis. Her marriage to Robert, once a source of comfort and stability, had become a gilded cage, suffocating her with its predictability and lack of passion. As she watched the raindrops chase each other down the window pane, her thoughts drifted to Lucas. Lucas, with his tousled dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. Lucas, who had burst into her life like a supernova, illuminating all the dark corners she had forgotten existed. Lucas, who was barely half her age and her student at the local community college where she taught literature. The sound of footsteps on the stairs jolted Layla from her reverie. Robert appeared in the doorway, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his tie perfectly knotted. He was the epitome of respectability, a successful lawyer with a kind heart and unwavering devotion to his wife of 20 years. "I'm heading out, darling," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Don't forget, we have dinner with the Hendersons tonight." Layla nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course! Have a good day!" As the front door closed behind Robert, Layla felt the familiar mixture of guilt and relief wash over her. She loved her husband, she truly did, but somewhere along the way, that love had transformed into something more akin to affection for a dear friend. The passion, the fire that had once burned between them, had long since faded to embers. With a sigh, Layla rinsed her mug and headed upstairs to get ready for her classes. As she dressed, her eyes fell on the small, leather-bound journal on her nightstand. It was a gift from Lucas, given to her on the last day of the summer semester. Inside, he had written a single line: "For the stories yet to be told." Those words had haunted her for weeks, igniting a spark of possibility that she both yearned for and feared. Lucas had been more than just a gifted student. He had awakened something in Layla that she thought had died years ago, a hunger for life, for experience, for passion. As she drove to the college, Layla's mind wandered back to the moment everything changed. It was during office hours, late one afternoon in July. Lucas had come to discuss his final paper, a brilliant analysis of forbidden love in classic literature. As they talked, the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Their eyes met, and in that instant, Layla saw a reflection of her own longing, her own desire for something more. She had tried to dismiss it, to chalk it up to a fleeting moment of weakness. But as the weeks passed, their interactions became charged with unspoken tension, lingering glances, accidental touches that sent shivers down her spine, conversations that danced on the edge of propriety. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Now, as the fall semester began, Layla found herself both dreading and anticipating seeing Lucas again. She knew it was wrong, knew the potential consequences of even entertaining such thoughts. But the heart wants what it wants, and hers seemed determined to lead her down a dangerous path. The campus was alive with the buzz of returning students as Layla made her way to her first class. She smoothed her skirt, took a deep breath, and stepped into the lecture hall. Her eyes immediately found Lucas, sitting in the back row, his gaze intense and unwavering. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of charged silence. Layla cleared her throat and began the class, forcing herself to focus on the syllabus and course expectations. But throughout the lecture, she could feel Lucas' eyes on her, like a physical touch caressing her skin. When the class ended, students filed out, chattering excitedly about the semester ahead. Lucas lingered, approaching her desk with a small smile playing on his lips. "Professor Hamilton," he said, his voice low and rich, "it's good to see you again." Layla's heart raced as she met his gaze. "Lucas, I trust you had a good summer?" He nodded, leaning against her desk with casual grace. "It was enlightening. I did a lot of thinking about the things we discussed last semester." The air between them seemed to thicken, heavy with unspoken words and suppressed desires. Layla knew she should end the conversation, maintain professional distance, but she found herself asking, "Oh, And what conclusions did you come to? Lucas' eyes darkened, and he leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. That some stories are worth the risk of telling, no matter the consequences. Before Layla could respond, another student approached with a question, breaking the spell. Lucas straightened, gave her a knowing look, and left the classroom. Layla watched him go, her mind reeling and her body humming with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lectures, grading, and stolen moments. Layla tried to maintain her professionalism, to keep Lucas at arm's length, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Their conversations after class grew longer, more personal. She found herself looking forward to his insightful comments during discussions, the way his mind seemed to work in perfect harmony with hers. One rainy afternoon, Layla was working late in her office when a knock on the door startled her. She looked up to see Lucas standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his hair and clothes. "Lucas? What are you doing here so late?" she asked, her heart skipping a beat. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I was at the library, lost track of time. I saw your light on and—" He trailed off, running a hand through his wet hair. Layla stood, grabbing a small towel she kept in her desk for emergencies. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "Here, dry off before you catch a cold." Lucas took the towel, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you, Layla." The use of her first name, so intimate in this setting, made her breath catch. "Lucas, we shouldn't—" Before she could finish, he closed the distance between them, his hand cupping her cheek. "Tell me you don't feel this," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "Tell me I'm imagining the connection between us." Layla knew she should step back, should put an end to this before it went too far. But the warmth of his touch, the intensity in his eyes, broke down the last of her resolve. With a soft gasp, she leaned into him, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was like a dam breaking. All the pent-up emotions, the longing, the desire they had been suppressing for months came rushing to the surface. Layla's hands tangled in Lucas' damp hair as he pressed her against the desk, their bodies fitting together perfectly. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and flushed, reality came crashing back. Layla stepped away, her mind reeling with the implications of what they had done. "We can't," she said, her voice shaky. "Lucas, this is wrong. I'm married. I'm your professor. There are so many reasons why this can't happen." Lucas reached for her hand, his eyes pleading. "But it already has, Layla. We can't deny what's between us. I know you feel it too." Layla closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "Please, just go. We need to think about this, about the consequences." With obvious reluctance, Lucas nodded. He moved to the door, but paused, looking back at her. "I won't give up on this, on us. What we have is rare, Layla. It's worth fighting for." As the door closed behind him, Layla sank into her chair, her head in her hands. What had she done? How could she have let things go this far? The taste of Lucas' kiss still lingered on her lips, a reminder of the line she had just crossed. That night, as she lay beside Robert in their bed, Layla felt like a stranger in her own skin. Her husband's gentle snoring filled the room, a familiar sound that had once brought her comfort. Now it only served to highlight the chasm that had grown between them. She thought of Lucas, of the passion and connection she felt with him, and the guilt threatened to consume her. The next few weeks were a torment of conflicting emotions. Layla tried to distance herself from Lucas, to focus on her marriage and her responsibilities. But every time she saw him in class, every accidental brush in the hallway, every heated glance across the room reignited the fire between them. Lucas, for his part, respected her wishes for space, but his eyes told a different story. They spoke of longing, of a connection too powerful to ignore. Layla found herself making excuses to stay late at the office, knowing that Lucas often worked in the library until closing. Their paths would cross, seemingly by chance, and each encounter left her more conflicted than the last. One evening, as Layla was packing up to leave, she found a folded note slipped under her office door. With trembling hands, she opened it to find Lucas' neat handwriting. "Meet me at the old boathouse by the lake, 8 p.m., "Please, Layla, we need to talk." She knew she shouldn't go, knew that nothing good could come from this clandestine meeting, but the pull was too strong to resist. At 7:55, Layla found herself parking her car near the deserted lakeshore, her heart pounding in her chest. The old boathouse was a relic from a bygone era, its weathered wood silvery in the moonlight. As she approached, she saw Lucas' silhouette in the doorway, waiting for her. He reached out, taking her hand and guiding her inside. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Layla swallowed hard, fighting the urge to pull him close. "I shouldn't have. Lucas, we can't keep doing this. It's not fair to anyone. Not to you, not to Robert, not to me." Lucas stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Life isn't fair, Layla, but love. Love is worth the risk. What we have, it's real, it's powerful. How can something that feels so right be wrong?" His words echoed the turmoil in her own heart. Layla leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I'm scared, Lucas. Scared of the consequences, scared of hurting people we care about. But most of all, I'm scared of how much I want you." Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. Layla felt as if she were drowning and being saved all at once. Lucas' arms encircled her, pulling her close as the kiss deepened. In that moment, all thoughts of right and wrong faded away, leaving only the overwhelming need to be closer, to connect on every level. What followed was a blur of passion and discovery. They made love on an old blanket Lucas had brought, the sound of lapping waves providing a rhythmic backdrop to their sighs and whispers. It was everything Layla had imagined and more, tender, passionate, and earth-shattering in its intensity. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Lucas traced lazy patterns on Layla's skin. "I love you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I know it's complicated. I know there are obstacles, but I love you, Layla, and I want to build a life with you." Layla's heart soared at his words, even as a part of her recoiled in fear. This was real now, no longer just a fantasy or a fleeting attraction. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the weight of that decision settled heavily on her shoulders. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both a liberation and a sentence. "But Lucas, what are we going to do? This can't last. The real world is waiting for us out there, and it won't be kind to what we're doing." Lucas propped himself up on an elbow, looking down at her with intense eyes. "Then we face it together. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, Layla, but I want you to know that I'm all in. Whatever comes, whatever we have to face, I'll be by your side." As they dressed and prepared to leave their secluded haven, Layla felt a mix of elation and dread. She knew that from this moment on, every day would be a choice between the safe, familiar life she had built with Robert and the passionate, uncertain future that Lucas offered. The next few months were a whirlwind of secret meetings, stolen kisses, and mounting guilt. Layla felt as though she were living two separate lives, the respectable professor and wife by day, and the passionate lover by night. She threw herself into her work, hoping to distract herself from the constant internal struggle, but thoughts of Lucas were never far from her mind. Robert, ever attentive, began to notice the change in his wife. Her distraction, her sudden need for late nights at the office, the way she sometimes looked at him with a mixture of guilt and sadness. He tried to reconnect, planning romantic dinners and weekend getaways, but Layla felt herself pulling further away with each gesture of love. As the semester progressed, keeping their relationship a secret became increasingly difficult. Rumors began to circulate among the students, whispers about the special attention Lucas received, the way Professor Hamilton's eyes lingered on him during class discussions. Layla knew they were playing with fire, but she couldn't bring herself to end things. Everything came to a head on a crisp autumn evening. Layla had told Robert she had a late faculty meeting, but in reality, she was meeting Lucas at a small bed and breakfast just outside of town. As they lay tangled in the sheets, basking in the afterglow of their lovemaking, Layla's phone buzzed insistently. With a sense of foreboding, she reached for it, seeing Robert's name on the screen. Her blood ran cold as she listened to his message. "Layla, where are you? I came by the college to surprise you after your meeting, but they said it ended hours ago. Please call me back. I'm worried." Panic set in as Layla realized the precariousness of their situation. She jumped out of bed, hastily gathering her clothes. "I have to go," she told Lucas, her voice trembling. "Robert knows I'm not where I said I'd be." Lucas sat up, concern etched on his face. "Layla, calm down. We'll figure this out. Maybe it's time to tell him the truth." She whirled on him, tears stinging her eyes. "The truth? That I've been lying and cheating for months? That I've fallen in love with one of my students? How can I possibly tell him that?" As she rushed out of the room, leaving a stunned Lucas behind, Layla felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. The drive home was a blur of tears and recriminations. How had she let things go this far? How could she have been so selfish, so reckless? When she arrived home, she found Robert waiting in the living room, worry and confusion etched on his face. "Layla, what's going on? Where were you?" For a moment, Layla considered lying again, making up some excuse. But as she looked at her husband, the man who had loved and supported her for 2 decades, she knew she couldn't continue the deception. "Robert," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to hate me, but I can't lie anymore." What followed was the most painful conversation of Layla's life. She confessed everything: her feelings of dissatisfaction in their marriage, her relationship with Lucas, the depth of her feelings for him. Robert listened in stunned silence, his face a mask of pain and betrayal. When she finished, the silence that fell between them was deafening. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How could you, Layla? 20 years of marriage, and you throw it away for what? A fling with a boy half your age?" Layla flinched at his words, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. "It's not a fling, Robert. I love him. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did, and I can't change how I feel." Robert stood, pacing the room like a caged animal. "And what about how I feel? Did you ever consider that? Did you ever think about the vows we made, the life we built together?" His words cut through Layla like a knife, each one a reminder of the life she was tearing apart. She watched as Robert's anger gave way to a deep, profound sadness that was almost unbearable to witness. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing the words were woefully inadequate. "I never meant to hurt you." Robert laughed bitterly. "But you did, Layla. You hurt me in the worst possible way." He turned to face her, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of pain and resignation. "I think you should leave. I can't look at you right now." Layla nodded, tears streaming down her face as she packed a small bag. As she reached the front door, Robert's voice stopped her. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his tone devoid of emotion. "Was he worth throwing away everything we built?" Layla paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I know I couldn't keep living a lie." As she stepped out into the cool night air, Layla felt a strange mixture of relief and devastation. The weight of her secret was lifted, but the cost had been enormous. She drove aimlessly for hours, eventually finding herself parked outside Lucas' apartment building. When he opened the door, concern etched on his face, Layla collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Lucas held her, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort as she poured out everything that had happened with Robert. "I've ruined everything," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "My marriage, my career, it's all falling apart." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "We'll figure this out together, Layla. I promised I'd be by your side, and I meant it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change and difficult decisions. Layla took a leave of absence from the college, unable to face the scrutiny and judgment of her colleagues and students. She and Robert began the painful process of separation, dividing up the life they had built together over 2 decades. Through it all, Lucas was her rock, offering unwavering support and love. But as the reality of their situation set in, Layla began to question whether their relationship could survive outside the bubble of secrecy and forbidden passion that had nurtured it. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Lucas' small apartment, Layla turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Lucas, are you sure this is what you want? A relationship with a woman who's going through a divorce, who's old enough to be your mother? You have your whole life ahead of you." Lucas took her hand, his gaze intense. "Layla, I love you. Age, circumstances, none of that matters to me. What we have is real, and I'm not walking away from it." But despite his reassurances, doubt had taken root in Layla's heart. She began to see the looks they received when out in public, to notice the way Lucas' friends seemed uncomfortable around her. The excitement of their forbidden romance had faded, replaced by the harsh realities of building a life together in the face of societal judgment and personal guilt. As winter gave way to spring, Layla found herself at a crossroads. She had received an offer to teach at a university across the country, a chance for a fresh start away from the whispers and pointed looks that followed her in their small town. Lucas, in his final semester, had been accepted to a prestigious graduate program in New York. Their paths, once so perfectly aligned, were beginning to diverge. On a chilly March evening, they walked hand in hand through the park where they had shared so many secret meetings. The air was heavy with unspoken words and impending decisions. Finally, Layla broke the silence. "Lucas, I think we need to talk about the future." He squeezed her hand, a sad smile playing on his lips. "You're taking the job in California, aren't you?" Layla nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "And you'll be going to New York. We always knew this day might come." Lucas pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "We could make it work, Layla. Long distance just for a while until we figure things out." But they both knew, deep down, that it wouldn't be that simple. The passion that had brought them together, the intensity of their forbidden love, had burned so brightly that it had consumed everything in its path. Now, in the aftermath, they were left to sift through the ashes of the lives they had upended. "I love you, Lucas," Layla whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I will always love you. But maybe love isn't always enough." They stood there, holding each other as the sun set, both understanding that this was the beginning of the end. Their goodbye, when it came, was bittersweet, filled with passionate kisses and whispered promises to stay in touch, even as they both knew those promises would likely fade with time and distance. As Layla boarded the plane that would take her to her new life in California, she felt a profound sense of loss, but also a glimmer of hope. She had lost so much: her marriage, her reputation, the comfortable life she had built. But she had also found a part of herself that had been dormant for years. The passion she had discovered with Lucas had awakened her to the possibility of living life fully, of taking risks and following her heart. Though their relationship had ended, the impact it had on her would last a lifetime. In the years that followed, Layla rebuilt her life piece by piece. She threw herself into her new teaching position, finding joy in mentoring young minds and rediscovering her love for literature. She made new friends, explored new places, and slowly began to heal from the tumultuous events that had led her there. Occasionally, she would think of Lucas, wondering where life had taken him. Sometimes, late at night, she would take out the leather-bound journal he had given her and run her fingers over his handwriting, remembering the intensity of their time together. But as time passed, those moments became less frequent, the pain of their parting fading into a bittersweet memory. Layla learned to forgive herself for the choices she had made, understanding that, while they had caused pain, they had also led her to a fuller, more authentic life. 5 years after leaving her old life behind, Layla stood at the podium of a writers' conference, preparing to give a keynote speech. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she caught a glimpse of familiar dark hair and intense eyes in the back row. For a moment, her heart stopped, thinking it was Lucas. But as the man shifted, she realized it was just a stranger with a passing resemblance. Smiling to herself, Layla began her speech. "Love," she said, her voice strong and clear, "in all its forms, passionate, forbidden, enduring, or fleeting, has the power to transform us. It can break us apart and put us back together. It can lead us down paths we never expected to travel. But most importantly, it teaches us about ourselves, our capacity for joy, for pain, for growth." As she spoke, Layla realized that her journey, the passion, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the healing, had led her to this moment. She had found her voice, her story. And in telling it, she hoped to help others navigate the complex, often messy reality of love and its consequences. The applause that followed her speech was thunderous, but Layla barely heard it. Her mind was on the blank page of the journal sitting in her hotel room, waiting for her to fill it with new stories, new experiences, new beginnings. She had learned that life, like love, was not a neat, linear narrative. It was messy, complicated, and often painful. But it was also beautiful, surprising, and endlessly full of possibilities. And Layla was finally ready to embrace whatever chapter came next, with an open heart and the wisdom born of a love that had changed everything.